One of the best parts about Halloween, at least for bookworms, is the excuse to read something creepy, thrilling, or unsettling. Whether it's vampires or vengeful ghosts, there's something for everyone when it comes to finding something scary. Even for those of us who primarily favor the supernatural, there's no shortage of variety. Vampires alone are a genre unto themselves and occupy more than half this list. Though most vampire novels, especially those written in the past couple decades, make a point of incorporating other paranormal beings into the mix, be they shifters, werewolves, or the fae. Most of the authors on this list are also masters of the fantasy or horror genres. So if this list isn't long enough, I highly encourage the most avid of readers to explore the libraries of each author. Without further ado, here are 5 more books you should read this fall. Number 1. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. No list of horror books would be complete without Stephen King. Most readers would choose to list the likes of It or Firestarter, but if you know anything about horror, you've already heard of those books. We all know about Carrie, Christine, and the Dark Tower series. But The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is an underrated gem. Plus, unlike It, it's one of King's shorter books, making it more accessible to readers with limited time. The hero of the story is 12-year-old Trisha. The plot revolves around her fight to survive after she becomes lost in the woods. This situation would be unnerving with any hero, but having a child at the center of a horror story ups the ante. What's more, it's not enough that Trisha is lost, facing everything from hunger to cold. There's a monster in the woods too, one which leaves behind evidence of its grisly activities. Whether this book is paranormal or psychological could be left up to the reader. Is there really a monster? Or is lack of food just causing the girl to hallucinate? Either way, the entity which Trisha encounters is terrifying, and the slow burn towards Trisha actually meeting the beast is the scariest part. Of course, the book offers comfort to readers too. Trisha is a strong heroine. Resourceful and clever, she's not the type of girl to give up and cry. Plus, she's not wholly alone, because through the use of her portable radio, she's able to listen to the games of her baseball hero, Tom Gordon. In this way, Tom Gordon keeps her company, offering her a connection to the civilized world, at least until the connection starts to sputter out. Number 2. Dracula. If you don't mind diving into classic literature, Dracula remains a compelling read. Though the style in which it's written might be unusual by modern standards, I didn't mind it. Told through journal entries and written documents, you might think the prose style would separate the reader from the story. But that's hardly the case. When it comes to the first-person entries, as laid out by the heroes of the story, they actually bring you closer to the characters. After all, this style was the 1800s equivalent of a first-person novel. The characters are also memorable. It goes without saying that Dracula is his charming, creepy self. But characters like the deranged Renfield also stand out. This is to say nothing of the creepy atmosphere. Filled with descriptive language and mood, the novel immerses you in Stoker's Gothic world. Before even reaching the castle, the ride there is especially memorable. Elements like strange lights, lightning, mist, and wolves have become staples of the horror genre. But Dracula helped to lay the groundwork for your standard paranormal horror, as well as establishing the typical tropes of which the classic vampire is composed. If you love classic literature, are obsessed with vampires, or just want to read the book that inspired countless adaptations and shaped vampires and horror as we know it, I'd highly recommend Dracula. a story which hasn't yet lost its bite. As a quick aside, be sure to hit the like button if you're enjoying the video so far. Number 3. Carmilla. Of course, all the credit can't go to Dracula. In fact, Carmilla, written by Sheridan Le Fanu, actually came out before Bram Stoker's Dracula. As such, we might not have had the iconic Dracula without the groundwork laid by Le Fanu. Like Dracula, Carmilla has the elements with which we are familiar: an ancient noble turned undead, a creepy castle, shrouded woods, and the vulnerable victims. However, it could be argued that Carmilla was more progressive than Dracula, at least by modern standards. For a start, Carmilla is a female villain, a powerful woman who could easily go toe-to-toe with the Count. Second, the book has homosexual undertones, as Carmilla's victims are always female. By today's standards, you couldn't describe Carmilla as exactly championing gay rights, as Carmilla is still framed as a terrifying monster to be destroyed. However, it's important to view the book within the context of its time. In the 1800s, same-sex relationships and sex were taboo topics, so to have any mention of them at all was remarkable. As with Dracula, Carmilla was a way for readers to consider all of the aspects of their lives they'd repressed, providing them a place to live out their darkest fantasies. In the 1800s, both novels would have been controversial, as discussions of intimacy, gay or straight, would have been shocking. Whether it was Carmilla's affection for Laura, or the fact that Dracula had multiple wives who openly flaunted themselves to charm their victims, each book allowed readers of the time to explore the hidden sides of their imagination. As for the story itself, Carmilla functions well as a classic Gothic horror story. The setting is moody and dreary, and Carmilla herself has some character development. Dracula might be longer, with more investigation and history to plod through, but there's something to be said for a quick, eerie read. The relationship between Carmilla and her victim Laura is also intriguing, as they develop something of a friendship, and in Carmilla's case, an affection, before Carmilla succumbs to her nature. Given the attention Dracula received, and still receives, it's a shame that Carmilla is so overlooked, especially given Dracula owes such a debt to it. Plenty of rewritten books or adaptations could be made from this story. Filmmakers could dive back into that time period, have Carmilla rise again in modern times, or retell the story as it was. If you want a spooky vampire book, but one which isn't given as much fanfare, I'd recommend Carmilla. Number 4. Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow has received several adaptations, and if you've seen the cartoon version Disney released, it's fairly close to the original story. Sleepy Hollow is a Halloween classic, and even those who haven't read it or seen the films will have heard of the terrifying Headless Horseman. Interestingly, Washington Irving didn't invent the creature. Instead, he drew from pre-existing mythology to fashion his villain, molding the spirit into the legends and culture of the town of Sleepy Hollow. As for the primary characters, it's also worth noting that they aren't heroic. Instead, they're flawed people, to say the least. The hero of the story, Ichabod, is a quirky schoolteacher. He's not conventionally attractive, especially compared to Brom, but he can be charming in his way, though he's also a hopeless social climber. Even Disney didn't gloss over Ichabod's flaws. If you've seen the movie, you'll know that Ichabod is just as interested in the fortune Katrina stands to inherit as he is in Katrina herself. Ultimately, Ichabod wants wealth and prestige, of which Katrina would just make up a part. and so what happens to him at the story's conclusion has a karmic ring. Granted, the ending has some ambiguity, but most seem to feel that the happy ending is wishful thinking. Number 5. The Southern Vampire Mysteries. If you can't get enough vampires, you can sink your teeth into Charlene Harris's Southern Vampire novels, now more commonly known as True Blood. Adapted into a hit television series, the series spans several novels. As such, Sookie's story will keep readers busy and invested for some time, though none of the books are overly long on their own. Sookie Stackhouse is the heroine of the story, and while she can't fight the way Buffy can, she is arguably more resourceful than Bella Swan. Though she loses her share of fights, Sookie is nothing if not determined, and she won't take a beating sitting down. In fact, the Sookie books flip the narrative we're familiar with from Twilight. Instead of having a vampire who can read minds, it is the human girl, Sookie, who is the mind reader, though her ability is often more trouble than it's worth. Ostracized by her small community and struggling to make ends meet as a waitress, Sookie is a relatable character, and it's easy to feel angry on her behalf when you see how much crap she has to put up with. Too many heroines these days are gifted fighters or lifted suddenly into great privilege, but for most of the series, Sookie remains a down-to-earth waitress who just happens to get caught up in the paranormal. In many ways, the series was also ahead of its time, being a true new adult series before such a genre even had its own label. Like Twilight, there's plenty of emphasis on romance and relationships. However, these books aren't afraid to be spicy, and might appeal more to readers of Sarah J. Maas. If you thought Sarah J. Maas gave her heroines a lot of shifting love interests, just wait until you read Sookie's story. The books keep you guessing who Sookie will choose. I haven't finished the series yet, but already Sookie has had 6 potential love interests, each of which are given their own arcs and character development. This is to say nothing of the mystery elements. While technically being fantasy romance novels, the books are written in the style of a mystery, and it usually falls to Sookie to discover a perpetrator. A string of murders is not an uncommon occurrence, though the humans of the world can be every bit as villainous as the vampires can. And for all their flaws, vampires are often the good guys in any given scenario. All in all, it's a solid series to lose yourself in. There's plenty of romance, and Harris will keep you guessing when it comes to who Sookie will end up with. Every reader is certain to have their own ship, and the mysteries Sookie must solve, as well as Sookie herself, with her personality and the drama she must contend with, are certain to pull readers in. In creating this list, I tried to offer a variety of books, covering popular series, as well as forgotten classics or overlooked gems. Halloween is one of my favorite holidays, but having the excuse to read something spooky makes the season that much better. Of course, if you're like me, 10 books might not be enough, especially if you've already read several, or plan to continue your spooky binge into November. If that's the case, I'd recommend exploring the libraries of the authors I've listed. The most prolific writer on this list is Stephen King, who's written 65 novels, to say nothing of his short stories or forays into nonfiction. With one of his more recent books being Fairy Tale, Stephen King is still writing, and while he's never written a bad book, there are several of his works which stand out, especially when it comes to his earlier career. If you read The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon and loved it, or just want an author you can stick with for a time, check out the video on the left, where I list some of my favorite Stephen King novels. And if you want to prepare your reading list for the new year, check out my favorite novels of 2022 for some ideas. If you want more content like this, hit the subscribe button. And as always, thanks for watching and happy reading.